Welcome to the June 26, 2023 City Council Work Session. Thank you for joining us in this hybrid meeting format. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials web page. And thank you again for joining us. And with that, I call this work session to order, and I will turn it over to the manager to introduce.
Yep, for just a second, and then I'm going to turn it over for a better introduction. Just a reminder, we're on part 2 of a work session we started last week, and last week was mostly meant to ground you just sort of contextually into all the decisions you were going to need to make tonight. And a reminder, the reason why I'm even making an intro is that all of the things that happen tonight are actually revising your next draft ordinance. It's not your final decision. So after you see it all, it's simplified, it's in your final draft, you will still have an opportunity to shift and change as you might see fit. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Amy Cameron. Amy's our rental housing navigator. I neglected to introduce her with her title last week when we had the sudden shift in leadership at the table. And Amy is actually rental housing navigator as a byproduct of phase 1. So it's kind of fun to see that come to full fruition as she leads us through this conversation.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Amy Cameron, the rental housing navigator. I'm here with Will Dowdy, the community development director. Additionally, we have Amanda Noble Flannery, the housing and homelessness section manager, and Genevieve Middleton, the affordable housing policy and planning manager. Code enforcement staff are joining us by Zoom. Thank you for the informative discussion and questions last Wednesday on renter protections phase 2. This work session series is a follow-up to the public hearing you held in March. Based on the outcome of today's work session, staff can bring back a revised draft ordinance for council's potential action. Last time, we reviewed components of the draft ordinance and some possible modifications that could consider both public feedback and housing policy board recommendations, including some recommendations on the administrative and programmatic fixes. As a reminder, direction received today is not the final direction on the draft ordinance, but rather on any revisions to the draft ordinance and whether you want to have potential actions scheduled. At each of your places or in your inbox, if you're attending remotely, is a handout with the compilation of answers to counselor questions from last week's work session, as well as an update on recent state law changes that could impact relocation assistance. I'll take a moment to briefly summarize a bill that has passed in both the Senate and House that is awaiting signature from the governor. Senate Bill 611 modified certain aspects of the state's rent control legislation. Specifically, it changes the annual rent increase cap to be 10% or 7% plus CPI, whichever is less, and to not occur more than one time in a 12-month period. The rent cap applies to dwelling units older than 15 years and affordable housing providers under certain circumstances. It prohibits landlords from exceeding the maximum amount the landlord could have charged the terminated tenancy when they reset rent for a new tenancy after a no-cause eviction in the first year. And it maintains existing state exemptions for rent increases. Today, we're looking for your direction, if any, on revisions to the draft ordinance before you vote on whether or not to adopt any or all of the phase 2 protections. The 4-block grouping of the series of potential motions, A through D, are provided in the AIS for your consideration to amend the draft ordinance. If you so direct, staff will return for your final action. As requested by council, staff are prepared to screen share the motions as you work through them during the work session this evening and to answer additional questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for setting us up to walk our way through in a disciplined way through this process. And I think with, I think the council president is just going to walk us through motion by motion, and we may adjust as we go along, but we'll let you take it from the top.
Slowly. Under the administrative and programmatic package, Move to direct the city manager to revise the draft ordinance with the items in the technical and procedural package in attachment C.
Second.
Okay, I actually will need to be able to see that front screen in order to manage. Is there a way of doing that, or I can have a,
She needs to see your
I
lineup.
need to see who's there, but so far nobody's there, so. Okay. Does anyone have comments or questions about this motion?
Mayor, before, if I may jump in
Please.
really quickly, the motion that's displayed on the screen is slightly different than the motion that Councilor Groves read. I think it's identical, except that Councilor Groves said, technical and administrative, and we say administrative and programmatic. I don't think it changes the substance of the council direction, but I just wanted, and this would simply be direction to the city manager to bring back a revised ordinance that includes the package and attachment C. So I think we're all on the same page, but I just wanted to be clear that there was a little bit of a wording difference.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. Again, any other questions or comments from counselors on this one? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 opposed. 1. So that passes 7-1. That's great. Okay. On to,
Sorry, Mayor, I apologize. That was 8-0.
that was a what?
8-0.
That was 8-0. Oh, that was a yes. That was just delayed. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Okay.
I'm slowing down in my old age. I'm so sorry.
All right. All right.
Okay.
On to B.
This is regarding relocation assistance triggers. Move to direct the city manager to revise the draft ordinance to remove the following relocation assistant triggers, 3 and 5.
Second.
Second.
Okay. Discussion, questions, comments? Emily.
Remove 3.
I think we need to remove more than those. I think, no, I can't. I wasn't expecting to have to do this so quickly. I think 3, 4, 5. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to find my list before I.
Here, I'll give you mine.
3, I think. 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah.
Should not be exempted. Neither should 7.
Oh, we're only on the trigger.
We're on the triggers.
Triggers.
Triggers, we're not on the
The
exemptions.
triggers is,
Sorry.
There you go, that page.
Sorry. Oh my God, how embarrassing.
Triggers are on council agenda page 23. You're there.
no. You're in the wrong thing. It's this one.
It's from 6/21, that it's dated 6/26.
Oh.
I need to read 6/26.
Okay, hold on. We have a little bit of a hold on here. So everyone needs to find the right
Maybe
place
we
in
take
the
a 5-minute
packet.
recess.
Yeah, we're going to take a moment for everyone to find the right page in the packet. So I don't know, Emily's got it.
Some of us are working out the 6/21 work session packet. So if we can just all be on the same page and just take no more than 5, just give me a.
So it's
Okay.
attachment B, regardless of which packet you're in, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's any different. I don't think it changed.
Yes.
Did it?
Yeah.
Did it change? I thought I went
Page
through this.
25 in attachment B in the June 21st packet.
Page 20.
Page 25 of attachment B.
Yeah, mine are the same.
They also have them showing on the screen.
Oh,
Show me your page 5. He's got right on
So
top there.
I go to 23 and then I go to
Yeah.
31. So there's,
Here, he's got one.
the triggers are the same.
that's why. Here, thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay, and Emily, if you found the right place?
I think you're on it.
Totally.
That's
That?
that one.
Okay, this is a lesson to me. I will slow down and let people find their place.
The exemptions will come under D.
Doesn't have my notes.
They're on attachment B.
So when 3, 4, and 5 are called out, I need that page, please.
Yes, so that's attachment B, page 25.
Thank you. And staff, if you could, when you're referencing attachments, be very clear about what page so we can quickly turn to those. That'd be helpful.
Yeah, and I can give you a little more time. No.
not page 25.
I guess it's not, it may be
Page 23.
page 23. It's, I have the electronic version, so
If you're
Yeah, there
looking,
you go, because that's what you.
Great.
So I have
Okay,
page
so
6
can we
for
repeat the
exemption.
motion, please? Can we repeat the motion, please?
Coming.
yes, hang on a second.
Randy's slowing down too. Cool.
Yeah, it's one of those days. Move to direct the city manager to revise the draft ordinance to remove the following relocation assistance triggers 3 and 5.
Second, for the sake of conversation.
Have you got it, Emily? Because you had raised your hand first.
I disagree. I think that when they tell them in advance, when they sign the lease, I'm going to demolish this or sell it, and that so it's not a surprise, then it's okay to not. I can't talk about it right now.
Okay, I'll tell you what, I'll come back to you. And when I've got Alan and then Matt.
So the next motion actually would revise 2, right?
Yes.
A couple of questions on 3A, B, C, and D. So this would trigger relocation assistance if there was they were going to demolish the unit, correct?
Yes.
And there's no notice on that.
The local ordinance would require notice along with a relocation assistance payment if relocation assistance is triggered. And what you are currently looking at is whether to maintain all 5 of the current triggers for notice and a payment, or to remove some of those triggers from the ordinance. The way that Councilor Groves made the motion, his motion would remove the triggers listed under number 3. So those qualifying landlord-based reasons for termination. If a landlord terminated the lease under one of those reasons, it would not trigger notice or relocation assistance payment. And Councilor Groves' motion would also remove number 5, substantial change in lease. So if there was a substantial change in a lease, it would not trigger notice or a relocation assistance payment if the motion passes.
So I'm wondering about 3A as it relates to exemption number 11. 3A says demolish the unit would trigger the exemption or would trigger the relocation assistance, but 11 on the exemptions would not trigger it if the term were less than 6 months and they had a permit. Otherwise, all other demolitions would trigger it.
Correct.
So if we add in the exemption 11, there's this, if they already knew about it, that's number 11, right? They knew about it when they entered into the lease. Okay. B, make repairs or innovations to the unit and property will be unsafe to live in. And that relates to exemption number 10, with dwelling unit rendered immediately uninhabitable. I suspect rendered immediately uninhabitable has to do with a natural disaster or something structural deficiency with the building. But this trigger 3B says that if they want to make repairs or renovations to the unit and the property will be unsafe to live in. So what does unsafe to live in mean? When the mayor and I were talking about this earlier, we're talking about, so if you remove the HVAC system and the heating system in the middle of winter, it makes it unsafe to be in. But if you did it in the middle of summer, it probably wouldn't be. And I guess, how do you determine when it's unsafe to live in? I mean, changing out appliances doesn't make it unsafe to live in. Changing out the flooring doesn't make it unsafe to live in. So there's kind of this threshold of what's unsafe and how do we determine that?
I do want to clarify that for exemption 10, that it is not due to the inaction or action of a tenant or landlord. So if a landlord took action to renovate a unit, that exemption wouldn't apply. So it would be, for example, if there was maybe a fire, that an arson started, a tree from a neighbor fell on the unit, earthquake.
Yeah, that's the immediately uninhabitable
Mhm.
part. So
The question about if a landlord chooses to renovate and the unit is not safe to live in, I think that one gets a little trickier. So if you renovated a bathroom in a unit that only had one bathroom.
that would probably qualify.
Mhm.
But if the landlord just wanted to say, I want to make renovations, you're out, that doesn't count. But depending on what the renovation was.
Yes, I think that's,
So Councilor Keating's example of hearing, and I've heard it too, people have been not had their leases renewed or evicted because they wanted to renovate and then, they changed the kitchen. Would that trigger the relocation assistance if they didn't have a.
Alan, you're at time, so I'll give you a second round for other questions.
Yeah, can they answer that?
Yeah, they can answer it, but I just want you to notice.
yes.
I think that what we've got to play out the situation that you're describing, if a landlord comes in and says, I'm going to do this repair, you need to leave. And if both 1 and 3 are included as triggers, then in the end, whatever choice by the landlord, whatever action taken by the landlord, that would result in the tenant being removed from the unit or evicted from the unit of one sort or another, that would trigger relocation assistance. And so whether it's covered by 1, because it turns out it's actually just cosmetic, or it's serious, that would be under 3. Either one of those would actually be one of your 5 triggers, or one of however many triggers you would choose. And so in that case, relocation assistance would be triggered. If you chose not to have 3, for example, then I think the borderline case is going to come to our code compliance team. A lot of what our code compliance receives are calls and complaints that have to do with something that is debatable. And so then they're in a role of figuring out whether it's actually an infraction for our code. And so if they would be the ones determining that actually it's not considered uninhabitable to remove a heating unit in the middle of the summer, or actually it is considered uninhabitable. And so that they'd be working through the material and they would make that determination that this situation is actually just a no cause eviction with some other information provided. And this one actually would be a landlord qualified reasons, which in this scenario is not a valid trigger. So that's, I think, how it would play out.
And I will jump in and add on quickly that all of the triggers under 3 are taken directly from state law. So kind of the overall umbrella of state law is that generally it's pretty hard to evict someone as a landlord. No cause evictions are only allowed during the first year of tenancy. After the first year, even if you have a fixed term, it rolls into month to month. And unless you're violating the lease, there are only a small subset of reasons that a landlord can evict someone. And those are the reasons listed under trigger number 3. So the question for council is, if a landlord uses a reason to terminate a tenancy that they're allowed to use under state law, one of those subset of reasons, does the city want to require the landlord to pay relocation assistance in that instance? And Councilor Grove's motion would say, no, we would remove those triggers if the motion passes from the ordinance. And so that if it was one of those qualifying reasons, which is allowed under state law, the landlord would not be required to pay relocation assistance.
And leaving 3 in means that if they did do one of those reasons, it would trigger relocation.
Yep.
So we're looking at a tighter constraint in local
Yes.
law if we kept this as a trigger than the state law, Colonel.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Matt, then Mike, then Randy.
So the landlord right now, thank you, Mayor, is the one who can determine if a unit is unsafe to live in. And the tenant has no recourse except in a court of law, which is a costly endeavor.
I don't think that's exactly right, Counselor Keating. There are other state laws relating to landlord tenant that require habitability of a rental unit. And the state statutes lay out what makes a rental unit habitable and or uninhabitable. And we also have locally protections in the rental housing code that you're thinking about amending using this ordinance are specifically related to habitability, whether the unit is safe to live in. So there are, as Will was saying, there are pieces in our code that we would look at. There are pieces that could be looked at in state law. The city would have some code enforcement authority. It's not just a matter of having to go and file a lawsuit to determine whether a rental unit is habitable or not.
At that point, it wouldn't be, because if we voted down Councilor Grove's motion, which I'm asking colleagues to do, I think that the protections that were determined by the HPB are sound. 2 of the 4 under 3 have happened to me. One in San Diego, a landlord sold our house that we were living in, and in the middle of winter, we had to find a new place rather quickly because that was not expected. Another happened here in the Beaver State, and thankfully, my landlords, who at the time lived out of state, were able to work with me, and I was on a month-to-month basis, and I was able to come to a reasonable agreement that was later than they wanted, but they already had family moving into the unit as well. So if 2 of the 4 have, if I have personal experience with 2 of the 4, I can recognize the pain points that community members are in when they're faced with such a daunting exercise of having to find a place quickly with limited avenues of proper recourse. Because this language comes from the state, I'm going to argue that we keep the language, keep as drafted. And then when we get to the next piece, we look at what the state's done and come closer to be alignment in the state with the state there. I'm willing to go there in regards to the rent increase trigger, provided we embrace and respect, and well, not that no one's disrespecting, but we embrace the work that the HPB thoughtfully did to get us to this point. And we indicate that these clear reasons that a landlord gives to give someone, for lack of a better term, the bums rush, and they have to then find a new place to live, that we make it, we create a pathway by which that person cannot fall into houselessness, but rather can stay in our community and get rehomed more quickly. It would be a disincentive for landlords to use these if we adopted them. So I'm asking colleagues to reject the motion, and I will happily float a motion that keeps as drafted the triggers, and we'll have a conversation about the increased trigger after that. Thank you.
Okay, I just need a little clarification. Increase, keep as drafted 3, and then what is, when you say
I don't want to get to,
triggers-
Mayor, I don't want to get to B2 just yet. And
okay,
so in
that's what you're talking about. Okay,
Right,
got it. Okay, okay, got
I'm in
it.
the B1 realm.
You're in the
Senate
B1.
Bill 61.
Okay, you're talking about going to B2. I just
Right.
need to understand where you're going. Okay, Mike, and then Randy.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say that, like Alan spoke about for a bit, the idea of relocation assistance at all sounds like a good one in theory. My concern with it is that when the state made laws around non-renewal of annual leases or around no cause evictions for less than a year, suddenly 11 months became the trigger at which many people received a no cause eviction, because everybody has to make sure that they're protecting their own interests in this scenario. My concern is that we're opening a Pandora's box where somebody gets paid of I think both sides gaming this system in a way that will not help the people involved as it is imagined. That's my chief concern. But I just want to understand that Councilor Grove's motion removes 3 and 5. Am I correct about that?
Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
My concern is with 4 as well. I would like to move to amend to remove 4. And if I get a second, I'll speak to it.
There a second?
I'll second that. for
Okay.
discussion.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think 4 potentially creates a windfall for tenants that may not necessarily be something intended with certainly with the legislation, with the ordinance. But if there's I can think of a scenario where there's a fixed term lease of 9-10 months, and the landlord will be obligated to say, I'm not going to renew that for another 9 or 10 months, and be obligated to give that notice, where the assumption might ordinarily be they may stay a little bit longer for a few months, but it'd be on a month-to-month basis from there. But the landlord with that first year is going to be obligated to give that notice, thus triggering under 4 their right to relocation assistance when there's students that don't live in Eugene at other times other than while they're attending the University of Oregon. And I think we could end up with an awful lot of students benefiting in a way they hadn't intended with this at the expense of landlords. And I would love to hear my colleagues, first of all, staff's comment on that. Is there something I'm missing here that would allow that not to happen if somebody moved into student house or a student apartment somewhere and signed a 10-month fixed term lease, and the landlord said, I'm not going to renew that for another 10 months, so they would then qualify? Is there something else that would knock them out of qualifying that I'm not seeing from staff?
Yeah, we've talked to people at UO, private landlords, and Portland, and asked them a question about how relocation assistance might impact pre-leasing and leases that are shorter than a year. We'll be happy. What we heard was that in Portland, it's not triggering relocation assistance.
But our ordinance does, yes? The way it's written?
It's the same as Portland's.
Would only be applicable within the first year.
Mm-hmm. And most landlords that I've talked to say that they actually want students to stay. And so they're asking people early in the year to pre-lease, and they're giving them multiple opportunities to sign a pre-lease or to tell the landlord that they're not interested in staying.
But my question is different than what you answered, and I appreciate your answer very much. My question was,
Okay.
Doesn't this ordinance create that opportunity?
Okay. And then Mike, you'll need a second round.
All right. Yes or no?
Okay. Bill, do you want to do this?
I have a better answer.
Okay. I think it's possible, and if council wants to give direction that you want a revised ordinance with that trigger in it, staff would be happy to bring back more information.
And the thing that I would just add to that is, one of the things that we would do with this program, like any other program, is keep a close eye on what we're hearing from community, all parts of the community, about the places where the intentions aren't being met and where there's loopholes. So if this had passed and this was in fact a loophole that we weren't understanding, then we would be tracking that closely and bringing that sort of thing back one way or the other. That's our normal practice.
Okay. Thank you. So So we now have an amended just to remind everyone, have an amended motion on the table, which now
We have a motion to amend.
a motion to amend, sorry, thank you, a motion to amend that adds number 4 to the original motion of 3. So now we got 3, 4, and 5.
Mayor, that was my
And-
point of information.
Yes, point of
Point of-
information.
The motion did not say add.
I mean, it said remove.
The motion, when I heard Counselor Clark make the motion, it was moved to amend,
To remove.
To remove.
to remove 4.
Right.
So that new motion is to remove 4. Is what's on the table, remove 3, 4, and 5?
It's a motion, the motion that is the main motion on the table is the one that is to remove 3 and 5.
Mhm.
Then there is a motion to amend on the table to add 4 to the 3 things being removed. So if the motion.
Also remove 4.
To also remove 4. So if the motion to amend passes, it would remove 3, 4, and 5. So right now, what's on the table to be voted on is whether or not you want to remove 4 from the list of triggers.
Okay, I have,
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
yes, Sarah,
Yeah.
that's a good question. You're not voting on whether 4 is removed, it's whether it gets added to
Whether it
the
gets added.
motion.
Right.
Yeah.
but I'm not ready to put this up to a vote yet. I want to see, I have Randy, Emily, and Jennifer in the queue, and I want to know if you want to speak to this new,
Yes, I do.
yes. Okay, so Jennifer, you're up.
And I still want my other.
I still have you in the queue, but I wanted to make sure
We get to keep both spots, right?
yeah.
So my question, I appreciate Mike bringing this up. We have a lot of students in our community, obviously, but the reason I wasn't concerned about it is that my understanding was that in that scenario, it's the students who want to leave. They don't want to pay money for leases over the summer. So they tend to do a short-term lease and then they leave for the summer and then they come back, obviously, unless they're graduating and then they're done. But for most of them, the reason they have short leases is because they're gone for the summer. And that wouldn't trigger a relocation because that's their choice, not the landlord's choice. Is that correct? So the only issue would be folks who are graduating and choosing to, I mean, I guess that's still their choice, right? They're choosing to leave. The landlord isn't kicking them out. So that wouldn't trigger a relocation either. So this isn't really, am I right in thinking this really isn't an issue because it's the tenants making the choice, not the landlord, right?
That's what we heard from the folks that we talked to.
I just want to make sure I
Yeah.
understand. Okay, for that reason, I will not support Mike's amendment because it doesn't really seem like that big of an issue, but I do think it's something we should keep our eye on and see if, maybe in the future, right? If maybe we made a mistake, so.
Okay, Alan.
So in the AIS on page 23.
Thank you.
That first bullet after the table, it says state law provides that after 1 year, a lease automatically rolls into a month to month if agreement is not renewed. So that means you have a 1 year agreement. And then if you don't do the renewal, it just goes to month. Therefore, the non-renewal of a fixed term lease trigger, number 4 that we're talking about, would only be applicable within the first year. So that means that this isn't applicable after the first year. And what my understanding was, what Jennifer said was a big part of this, which is if they only want a 9-month lease, then they would get out of it. If they wanted to pre-release, then they could choose to do that, but it wouldn't trigger relocation assistance. So for the vast majority of the circumstances, it wouldn't trigger. So I'm wondering, Mike, if you thought this goes beyond 1 year or what the circumstance
Nope.
was that you were thinking about.
Happy to explain, not my turn. I will unless the mayor allows me.
Yeah, no, I'll let you go ahead and speak to it.
I think there are quite a number of students who have that exact circumstance where they live in other housing for the first 3 years, say the university's requirement about the dorms the first year for those in the Greek system that live in a fraternity or sorority for the next couple of years, and then may with a 2-year obligation as a part of that, and then live in an apartment their last year. They are living in an apartment, as I did, for 1 year only, and with a 9 to 10 month lease, and the as I understand it, the landlord is required to notify them they're not renewing that fixed term lease, at which point they're then obligated, the way this is written, to let them know that they have 2 months or 3 months of rent coming for assistance. And that's my concern.
Okay, I just want one more clarification from staff about whether that's really what's happening here.
So I think that the scenario, again, trying to play this out for the parties involved, if there was a student who was in 1 year of 9 months of leasing and they intend to leave at the end of the 9 months, they would have the option to let the landlord automatically renew the lease or tell the landlord that they don't want the landlord to renew the lease. I guess you could say that the action is at the renter's, the renter has the action there. They can choose to say that they're ready to be done with the lease at the end of the lease, or they can allow the landlord to renew it. If they allow the landlord to renew it, the landlord has a tenant who is signed up for the next 9 months or whatever that term is. And so if you are the student leaving, unless you want to pay rent in multiple places or pay rent in a place that you're not living in, I think this corresponds with the feedback that we've heard. At that point, it will be in the renter's interest to tell the landlord they don't want to have the lease renewed.
Unless we're giving them 3 months rent for free. That's my point. If they don't trigger the landlord.
I don't think that would trigger it. I think what we're hearing is it won't trigger it.
But the landlord has an obligation to tell them he's not renewing the lease. At that point, it triggers.
Well, but
No, he doesn't.
he doesn't have to.
The end of 9 months.
Let's let Will.
Yeah. So again, at the end of the 9 months, the landlord, if the tenant would like the lease to be renewed, the landlord at that point has the requirement to either renew the lease or pay relocation assistance. But if the tenant would like to end the lease at the end of that term, then the landlord has no obligation to pay relocation assistance.
My point was gaming the system. Let's say the student stays quiet, as most do, who just move out on their last day. And the landlord 30 days early is mandated to notify the student whether the landlord is deciding to renew it or not if the student stays silent. At that point, they also have to tell them, yes, you're entitled to. And why would you say anything if you're entitled to 3 months rent coming back? If the consequence is you may have to stay another month and pay another month's worth of lease because it goes to month after that.
It's so, if I may, Mayor, it is an accurate statement that a landlord who declines to renew or replace an expiring rental agreement as the ordinance is currently drafted would trigger relocation assistance, which means notice to the tenant that they don't want to renew and the tenant will need to find someplace else to live and relocation assistance payment. As Will mentioned, if it's a situation where the tenant says, okay, I mean, so the landlord has two choices: to renew, keep a tenant in the building, not notify, not pay relocation assistance, or not renew, look for a new tenant, and that will trigger relocation assistance as the ordinance is currently drafted. And I think what I'm hearing staff say is what they have heard from other folks on the ground is that in most cases, when a student is a tenant and there's a fixed term lease of less than 1 year, the student wants to leave. And so if the student wants to leave, that would not trigger relocation assistance because it's the student's choice and not the landlord's choice. But if there was an instance where it's the landlord's choice, then relocation assistance would be triggered. And so the scenario that Councilor Clark describes potentially could happen.
Okay, thank you.
To
All right.
to this motion.
Yes, Matt.
But it seems to me like it's searching for a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. In that common sense would dictate, I would think, that going into an agreement with a student who both parties know are only going to be there 9 months, it's made really clear in the language up front.
So what council could do is decide to remove that as a trigger for relocation assistance. If it feels like both parties knew they were entering into a fixed term lease, and if it's for less than a year, then council has, council could decide that that is not something that you would want to trigger notice or relocation assistance here locally.
So but it's my understanding that with the triggers, that the lease automatically renews unless one party ends it, right? With the trigger. But if the landlord says no, then relocation. And if the tenant says no,
No relocation.
So the lease, there's a lot of layers of regulation, and Amy, you please jump in if you feel like I'm misstating this, but once a tenant has been in a unit for a year, whether that's in a month-to-month lease or a fixed term lease, once they are in a year, they automatically become month-to-month, and they basically get to stay under state law unless the tenant violates the terms of the lease, or we see one of those qualifying landlord reasons, which are the number 3 triggers under local relocation assistance as the ordinance is currently drafted. I think what Councilor Clark was talking about is a situation where it's a fixed term lease of less than a year. So there's no state law requirement that it automatically roll over to month because the tenant hasn't yet been in the dwelling unit for a year. The landlord chooses not to renew the lease. And so at that point, as the ordinance is currently drafted, the landlord would be required to notify the tenant that they're not renewing and to pay the relocation assistance. And there might be some financial incentives toward the end of that almost year period that the landlord would have to consider whether, they would choose to pay currently 3 months of relocation assistance or enter into a new lease term with that tenant. And once that tenant has been in the space for a year, then the state law covers them, and it becomes like when that second fixed term lease expires, it would become a month-to-month lease. And again, the landlord couldn't terminate that lease unless the tenant violated the rental agreement or there was a qualifying landlord reason.
okay, so then a clarifying question, if I may, Mayor.
Mhm.
When I signed the lease of our newest home that we're renting, we signed an 8-month lease, which is often something that you see landlords and tenants get into, sadly, so they don't have to meet that 1-year threshold if the tenants don't work out. That's a fixed term lease. So we're using the student conversation to distract, or it feels like it's a distraction. I don't want to accuse my friend and my colleague, but it feels like a distraction from the actual problem, which are thousands upon thousands of persons entering into an agreement under a 1-year lease and get bumped or booted without any recourse. And it's a constant cycle of 8, 9, 10, 11-month leases that this number 4 would be preventing.
You are correct, Councilor Keating, that number 4 would apply both in the student context as described by Councilor Clark and in the context that you described, where it's not a student, someone just enters into a fixed term lease of less than a year.
Right. Colleagues, this is a poison pill. Please vote no on this recommendation and the aforementioned recommendation to remove 3 and 5, please.
Okay. I am now going to exert a little bit of control over this because we still have a lot of other things to talk about, and remind you that this is a draft language. You'll get another chance. So I have Randy, Jennifer, and Alan. I'm going to give you 1 minute to ask your question. Okay, 1 minute. And then we're going to, yes, on this current,
Yeah. So
motion to
in
amend.
Matt's instance, if they renewed it after 8 months and were there for a year, then they're there for a year, then it changes, right?
So if they're
In the second term.
was 8 months and the second term was a year, by then the tenant would have been in the dwelling unit for more than a year, so the state law protections would apply. But if the landlord declined to renew that fixed term lease under the ordinance as it's currently drafted, that would trigger relocation assistance. The landlord would still have to send out the notice.
That's fine. Can we make it that there be an affirmative action on the part of the tenant to notify the landlord of their intent, say within 30 or 60 days. So Mike's case where a person doesn't say anything and they just stay silent, and the day before the lease turn, they say, oh, I want to renew. And then they say, well, you didn't say anything until 24 hours before the termination of your lease. Then relocation assistance kicks in. I don't think that's right. If you had an affirmative action on the part of the tenant to say whether or not what they're going to do, say 30 days or 60 days beforehand, then everybody's on equal footing.
So
Notice.
I apologize, Councilor Zelenka. The ordinance actually does require that already. So the landlord has to provide notice of the tenant that to the tenant
And I
they're
think
entitled to relo, and the tenant has to within 30 days of the date of the landlord's notice, request relocation assistance.
30 days?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
Already done that.
Randy, I apologize.
That's fine. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. And I appreciate that last piece there, Councilor Zelenka. I just wanted to speak to Councilor Clark's motion here, and I'm not, and forgive me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but I think what Mike is trying to do is look ahead at potential problems. And when we say, well, those problems haven't existed, we're changing the rules here. This is a new game, and we don't know what all the impacts are going to be. I'm sure we're going to have to revisit this downstream as we live with it for a while. And I think we kind of need to plan on that. But in my opinion, our goal should be to make it fair for both sides. We need to find, how do we keep both sides playing nice and working to try and make this system of renters and landlords work. And I think that's also what I heard Councilor Zelenka say, and I agree with that. There needs to be something that holds both parties accountable. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna put this up for, Emily.
I had a turn. I have a problem with it. It's a fixed term lease. Both sides have agreed this is what they're gonna do for however many months. And to me, that's the end of it, unless they decide to keep going. So one of the things I look at is this a surprise that the person now has to move? And in this situation, I can see I wouldn't want to move in 9 months either. But if you signed a fixed term lease, you're already saying, I know this is for 9 months. So then I don't think it's appropriate for the landlord to then have to give you 3 months rent, meaning that they're only getting 6 months rent for a 9-month lease. So I don't think it should be a trigger.
Okay. All right. With that, I am gonna,
Yeah, I sum up there.
well,
Less than 1 minute.
I actually do not, I think we all understand where we are. The question on the table is just a motion to substitute, right? The motion to amend. So we know what your amendment is. Is there something we don't know, Mike, about this? I'm just trying to keep us moving.
After the comments, I just wanted to focus in on the point here. Isn't one type of renter or another, as Matt mentioned, is that when we create the system, I don't think we've thought it through well enough to keep it from being gamed on all sides. And it's going to cost a lot of people a lot of money, both tenants and landlords. And that's why I want to pull 4 out.
I understand that. I think we all understand that. Okay. We have a motion to amend on the table. All in favor of amending the motion, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3. Opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay.
Mayor, if I may, Councilor Evans had a hand up.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah, I can't. Greg, can you clarify whether you voted yes or no?
I voted yes to amend.
Yes. Yes to amend. So that was, okay, so we had 3.
4 to
4.
We have 4 to 4. Okay, I am going to vote no to amend. Okay, so now we're back to the original motion, and I have the queue still here. So now I have Randy, Emily, and Jennifer still in the queue for the original motion.
Thank you, Mayor. I will just stop there. The attorney answered my question earlier. Thank you.
Okay, and then Emily?
Thank you. I think number 3 should be a trigger. A, if you know you're gonna demolish it, that's one of the exceptions. And for B, if you know you're gonna make repairs, you say it at the beginning, so that's an exception. The landlord's immediate family member, that's a total surprise to the tenant. I think they should have help moving. And again, D has an exemption for number 12. So I think all of these triggers should stay in here. Yeah, I think these should stay in. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Jennifer, then Lindsay.
Yeah, I'll make it quick. I agree with everything that Emily said.
Okay. All right, Lindsay?
Yes. Hi, and I'm sorry, I'm very unwell today, so I can't be there in person. But I agree as well. I think 3 should be included as a trigger. As a landlord myself, which disclosure, I could see any of these scenarios playing out in my own situation in the future. In all of them, I think that I should be, responsible for not creating the people who live there to be unhoused potentially. So it is, all of those are landlord's choice, and usually they have a lot more time to be able to consider those options. If I have an immediate family member, I likely have a lot of notice for myself to want to move them out in there, and equally with the other options. So I do want to include trigger 3.
Okay. All right, any other comments now on the original motion? Alan.
So number 3A, demolish, there's coming up a limited exemption. If they had notice and they had a permit and they signed in the lease, everybody knew about it, then it wouldn't trigger relocation assistance. Got that. So this would be, next, when we're going to demolish the building, and no notice at all, and that would trigger. So the limited exemption of number 11 if they have notice. So number 3C, there's an exemption, number 7, which is one of the 12 exemptions, which this says if you're if an immediate family member is going to move in, then it would trigger it, but then exemption 7 says it wouldn't trigger it. Right? So they're it's either one or the other.
That's correct.
So if you wanted, okay. And then on number 12, landlord has sold the unit. Number 3D, which is landlord has sold the unit. Number 12 says if the tenant was notified in advance, what does notified in advance mean? Is that before they signed the lease, so they knew they were going to sell it?
Yes, that's at the execution.
Okay. So in those two cases, demolition and sale were known before they entered into the agreement.
Correct.
And those should not trigger relocation assistance because everybody knew it. Okay. In other instances where they didn't know, then it would. So if the landlord said, "Oh, by the way, next month we're going to sell the building, so you have to move," that would trigger relocation assistance.
That's correct.
Okay, Randy.
Thank you, Counselor. I just wanted to respond to the thought that family moving in, you always have notice. I can think of quite a few scenarios where you aren't going to have a lot of notice. Life happens and people get into situations where they need to place a relative, divorce, domestic issues, houses destroyed by fire, flood, or landslide. There's quite a few things where you may want to exercise the use of your rental to help your family member. And so I'd just like to make sure we're thinking about that as well. Thank you.
Okay, Lindsay.
Yeah, just to respond to that response, and that I agree. You should be able to place your family member in your rental unit if you so desire. However, if that's displacing another family from their home that they, consider their stability and their security, and you're doing that, with little notice, you should have to pay them to do so. I feel that responsibility as a landlord. I know many other landlords that do as well. And it's not vilifying landlords, as you had kind of previously stated in our last session. It's just a responsibility that we have over people's lives in our hands.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we have the motion on the table to remove the triggers 3 and 5. I think we're ready for a vote on that.
I had a question about 5.
Okay. Okay. One more round.
We're
Alan,
still on
question
3.
at 5. Yep.
On 5, so a substantial change of the lease. What constitutes a substantial change of the lease?
Councilor Zelenka, you'll see that we did add a definition of substantial change to the rental agreement.
Right.
The definition section of the ordinance. And
I want you to read it.
it is on page 11 of the June 21st packet. So a substantial change to a rental agreement is a change of terms from those included in a prior rental agreement between a landlord and a tenant that substantially disadvantages the tenant, and the landlord does not provide for a commensurate decrease in rent. Examples of substantial changes to rental agreement include, but are not limited to, tenant responsibility for payment of utilities previously included in monthly rent, tenant responsibility for payment for a parking spot previously included in monthly rent, landlord no longer allowing pets to occupy the dwelling unit, reduction of space available for tenant use, reduction of amenities available for tenant use, and removal of furnishings from furnished units.
Those are substantial.
Yeah. Okay.
Please.
All right. I think I'm ready to take this to a vote. All in favor of the motion on the table to remove triggers 3 and 5, please raise your hands. 1. All opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Greg?
I say yes.
You're a yes. Okay, so that's 2 to 6. Okay, so that goes down. Those triggers are staying. Okay. All right. Next up.
We make another.
Does that mean they all stay?
Well, unless someone, you're free to make,
They
somebody
follow,
can
keep it
step
dry.
up and put a motion on, but it's otherwise. Emily?
Those were motions to amend. We still have to vote on the main motion.
We did.
You just
We
did.
Oh, we did.
we just did.
Oh, yeah, that is the
We
main
just-
motion.
Yes.
Yeah.
We did. We moved not to amend, and we just moved on the motion as originally proposed. Remove 3 and 5. And now Emily has raised her hand with a possible motion.
I move we keep all of the triggers 1, 2, 3, and 5, and do not include 4.
Do you have a second? Okay, I don't think you have a second. All right, any other motions related to the triggers before I jump ahead?
Before B2.
Before B2, sorry, on B1.
Point of clarification.
Yeah,
They fall to keep as drafted is my understanding. Is that correct, council?
That is correct.
Great, thank you. I'm ready for B2.
okay, all right, let's move on to B2.
We're just focusing on changes.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mayor. Move to direct the city manager to revise the draft ordinance to require relocation assistance when rent is increased by more than 10% in a 12-month period.
Second.
okay, discussion. Alan?
I would like us to, since, what is it, yesterday? SB 611 passed and 611 said 7% plus inflation or 10%, whichever is less. And I think it strengthens our protections here. We're consistent with state law. So if you'd make that be a friendly amendment, that would be what state law says, 7% plus inflation or 10%, whichever is less.
I'll accept that, friendly.
Okay, second.
And I second it.
Second.
Okay, we've got
Second.
a second. Thank you. Any other discussion on this one? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Mayor,
Matt.
this one gives me a lot of heartburn, but I also recognize the wisdom in being in parallel to, or being in alignment with state law. It'll hold up in court, more likely. It's consistent. I think the real issue that we've seen across the board are like the 15% increases, because there was it was plus inflation, and when you have inflation at 7.5%, suddenly you've got folks who have $700, $800 rent increases. 10% it's a bit much, and I would argue 5%, because that's the average rent increase in Eugene, is more appropriate. But I also recognize the wisdom, and I'll be supportive of the 10 because of the alignment with the state and the consistency with the state. It gives me heartburn, but I'll be a yes.
All right. Thank you. Any other comments? Emily?
I'm not gonna make the motion, but I think it should be 5%. I think that's a reasonable rent increase, since you can do it every year.
Okay. Okay. Alan, do you have a?
What if, so the state law says 7% plus inflation or 10%, and if we said 5%, what would that mean? That would just trigger our relocation assistance earlier. It's not necessarily the state law.
So
Okay.
that's as drafted. So you would keep it as drafted.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it currently says 5%.
Right.
Okay.
Mayor?
Yes, Greg, go for it.
Yeah. I'm a little stumped here because I believe that the amendment that Councilor Zelenka proposed would be in alignment with the state law, which is at 7%, correct?
7% plus inflation, or
inflation,
10%,
right.
Whichever's less.
Whichever is less.
What
Okay.
Senate Bill 611.
Yep.
Yep.
Because I thought I heard Councilor Keating say 10%, but it's 7% plus inflation
With a cap at 10%.
With a cap at 10.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
that's effectively what happens.
I just want to make sure that we're clear on what we're voting on.
Yeah. Yeah. We're mirroring, the proposal is to mirror the new state law.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay. So,
Or soon to be state law.
Lindsay.
Right. State law, yeah.
So if the state is capping rental increases and we're saying that we can, relocation will be triggered beyond 10%, then is that just saying nothing because there will be no trigger because people can't raise their rent beyond 10%? Or am I getting that incorrect?
Councilor Leach, what I understand the direction of the motion to be is so the new state law will cap rent increases. And what I understand the motion to direct staff is to bring back a revised ordinance that would, if a landlord were to increase rent to the capped amount, would also trigger relocation assistance. So then a tenant who is looking at an increase in rent at the maximum amount allowed by the state would have the opportunity to decide to stay and pay the increased rent, or to leave and receive a relocation assistance payment from the landlord.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
What if it were 9.9%?
Right.
Can I
So,
have a clarification? Oh, do you want?
Yeah, so what I think Councilor Leach is looking at, and we're looking at right now also, is the phraseology says increase by more than 7%, Councilor Leach, if that's what you're looking at. So it shouldn't be by more, it should be by.
7% or more.
Yeah. 7.
Yeah, and I think it really should be the maximum, what we're really talking about, the trigger is the maximum annual rent increase percentage that is allowed by ORS 90.323, which is set by the Department of Administrative Services every year and will now be set at 7% plus CPI or 10%, whichever is less. So I believe the intent of the motion would actually be to move to direct the city manager to revise the draft ordinance to require relocation assistance when rent is increased by the maximum annual rent increase allowed by ORS 90.323 sub 2.
Okay,
Can I add to that as well?
Please.
One other important differentiation between the state law and what is in the draft ordinance or included in the motion as well is that the state law has an exemption for units that are less than 15 years old. And the draft ordinance, including with or without the motion as drafted here, does not have an exemption for units that are less than 15 years old. So this would essentially bring all units, regardless of age, into the same requirements.
Thank you for that. That was important.
I think it's important that you as the council who are directing staff to bring back a revised ordinance, be very clear on what your underlying intent really is. And so the motion that you have made is exactly as you made it, which is increased by more than 7% plus CPI or 10% in a 12-month period, whichever is less. So if that is not your intent, and it is really if somebody increases it to the maximum allowed under the new state law, that would trigger it. I recommend that you adjust your motion accordingly.
So if I can just say that in this, so the simple interpretation of that is, are we saying up to 10% or 10% and over? Like 10%.
It can't be 10%.
Can't go over 10%, but it can go to 10%.
It's if they go, as I understand it, and this way Lauren explained it, is if somebody increases rent within a 12-month period to the maximum allowed under state law, if it's at the maximum, it triggers relocation. If it's less than the maximum, it wouldn't trigger relocation. If that's the intent. Is that the intent?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Looking at the motion.
Yes.
Question.
Yeah. Question, Alan.
So I noticed that in the AS, Portland, Seattle, and Los Angeles all use the 10% number, which is probably why the legislature chose that too, or at least it influenced it. So to avoid the relocation assistance, is all a landlord have to do is charge 9.9%. And then that wouldn't trigger.
Right.
Correct?
Correct.
Unless the inflation is less, unless the 7%
Right,
plus
if-
CPA is less than
Right.
9.9%, whichever is less.
If it's 2% inflation and 7%, if they charge more than 9%.
Right.
If they charge 9%, it would trigger, but if they charge 8.9%, it wouldn't.
Right. Okay, thank you, everyone, for that. Okay, so that motion is on the table.
There's one more comment with that. It's so that, I mean, whenever you set a number, somebody's gonna say, okay, that's the rule, right? So if you set a number, it's gonna be less than that. If we set it at 5%, they're gonna do 4.9. So whatever the number is,
Okay.
somebody's gonna choose to do that.
Jennifer.
So my intent would be that it can't, obviously going over isn't an option. So that would not be what I would want to do. I would want it to be the other one where you have to do the 9.9%. Otherwise it triggers it. So I guess I do not want to support this, is what you're telling me, or unless.
No, this is no,
Okay.
That's consistent with you.
that's consistent with what you want. We're saying
Oh, they're
to the
fixing it.
maximum. Okay.
Only
there
if
you
they max it out, does it trigger.
Yeah.
Okay. We're fixing it. All right. Excellent.
go. Okay. Okay, everyone clear?
So when she just, this is part of the crazy making when we've got it in real time up there. Someone will need to, what I would please recommend just for clarity of the record, just withdraw the motion, withdraw the second and remake them and remake a motion.
I'll withdraw the second.
Okay. You all right with that?
I didn't second it, he seconded.
Well, but you amended it.
So you're gonna
I didn't amend it. You
withdraw it
tried- I tried
anyway
to
and
do
start all over again.
Okay, I withdraw. Move to direct the city manager to revise the draft ordinance to require relocation assistance when rent is increased by the maximum annual percentage allowed under ORS 90.323 sub 2.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Greg, do you have your hand up?
Yes, Mayor, I do.
7. Okay, and opposed? 1. Okay, so that passes. Thank you very much. All right, on to C.
Move to direct the city manager to revise the draft ordinance to set the relocation assistance payment at 2 months.
Okay,
2 months of.
Humans,
Oh,
you might need to.
yeah, it kind of just ended there. In the,
what are my notes?
yeah, right. That's the notes just say
2 months rent.
went at period.
The current rent the tenant is paying,
Yes.
not fair market.
Yeah, right,
2 months current rent.
right. 2 months current rent. Okay, questions? Anyone want to speak to that? Comments, Matt?
Move to substitute 3 months rent.
Second.
Okay, discussion, Randy?
Going back to what's fair for both sides. I don't know that we can only require 2 months deposit and then say the landlord has to pay 3 months back. I just think that those two should be in parity with each other.
Okay, Alan and then Jennifer.
I agree. It shouldn't be punitive. It should be, if you get your lease terminated and you have to go move in over here, you have to pay first and last. And so that's 2 months. And so there's other moving costs and things like that. But I think those two things should be in parity. It seems punitive to put 3 months on it and have the landlord pay a whole extra month when this person may or may not have much moving costs or any other kind of costs associated with it.
Okay, Jennifer?
Yeah, so I'm gonna support Councilor Keating's 3 months because I think we need to remember that this is not just any moving out. These are no cause. These people haven't done anything wrong. They're just being asked to leave their home and find a new home. And our stated goal in this process was to keep people housed and to support housing racial equity. And fairness is not equal all the time. And if we're going to be a government that supports equity, then we need to support the people who are needing the most support. And we know that renters and owners are not random. There are people who are renting. There's from specific populations they tend to come from, those with low incomes, those who are women and minorities, and fairness isn't always equal. And in this case, I think it is quite equitable for them to get a 3-month payment because moving is very expensive and it is nowhere near just first and last that a person has to find, who often does not have it, in order to relocate.
Okay, thank you. Matt, you want to speak?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, back in the day, it was a first and last month model. The reality is that today, tenants are paying a first, a last, a security deposit, fees, additional deposits, moving costs, utilities, that you're essentially paying a 3 months worth when you're moving in. We have. And so to Jennifer's point, to Councilor Diaz, yeah, we're in a work session. To Jennifer's point, thank you. It's not just a black and white, first month, last month cost associated. The point of the this trigger, from my vantage point, is to fundamentally prevent houselessness, is to prevent no cause evictions, is to prevent that cycle when you're living on the edge, and gives the tenant and the landlord some security, some semblance of security. Moreover, I can't think of a better disincentive for someone, for a landlord to not engage in no cause evictions if they had to be on the hook for a 3-month relo assistance. I suspect it will be used minimally. Does that track with what we're seeing in other communities?
The question is, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, Counselor?
Does relocation assistance in other communities that have adopted similar structures is a 3-month used minimally?
No, it varies by jurisdiction. Portland uses a fixed amount set per bedroom size. It is roughly 3 months. There are a couple other jurisdictions that also come out to be about roughly 3 months. There are some that only do 1 month. There are some that do 2 months. And there are some that base it on the tenant's income.
Regardless of how they structure it, is the trigger being used minimally?
I don't know the answer. I don't have data about how often the trigger is used for rent increases.
Is there additional, well, I'm putting the cart before the horse in regards to fair market rent. I was going to ask about the additional staff time it would take to determine fair market rent each time, or if it's easier on staff to capture what the tenant has been paying at a 3-month versus fair market.
I think it would be a little bit more of an administrative burden to base it on a floor of fair market rent.
Okay.
In terms of code compliance and gathering the documentation, if there was a question about whether the landlord paid the correct amount, there might be some administrative work that needs to be done on that end of things as well.
Right. And that's going to exist whether it's FMR or whether it's 3-month anyway.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. Is any part of this calculating the idea that some deposits are refundable and that when someone pays a first and last month, they're getting the use of the structure for the first and last month? So in other words, you're asking the landlord to pay for 2 months of somebody's rent in their next place, and that it seems to me like it's a disparity of who has to pay for whose rent when. Is there any calculation here that differentiates even on the first point of which deposits, as Matt mentioned, are refundable and which ones are not?
I can answer that. I know that that's something that we've looked at staff, as staff, been aware that, like you said, some deposits and some fees, they add up to different things. And so that's been in our understanding of this as we've gone through the different conversations about capping fees and also capping deposits.
Well, I would just say from my point of view, if there's only 2 choices, it should be 2 months rather than 3, just for the sake of the argument that I was making there. Yes, it's a lot of money at one time, but it shouldn't be punitive, as Randy said. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion to substitute. All in favor of substitution, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. Opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm opposed. So back to the original motion of 2 months. All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Opposed? Wait, I'm missing 1. Greg, how did you vote?
I voted yes.
Okay, so let me have all the yes votes again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And Emily, I can't tell whether you're a yes or a no.
No.
You're a no. Okay, and opposed? 2. Okay, so that passes. Thank you. Okay. So now I'm gonna, before we put motions on the table in the next round of both talking about the small landlord compensation fund and the exemptions, because there are 12 of these, and that's a lot to navigate, with 8 different sets of opinions. So I am gonna ask each of the counselors in a lightning round, I'll give you a minute at most to comment on the exemptions, any exemptions that you want to remove. Either you want to keep them all, you don't want to remove any, or just list the exemptions you want to remove. We'll open the floor for discussion, but before Randy puts a motion on the table, I think I just want a sense of the room of which are the motions that are, which of the exemptions are actually in dispute, so we can kind of focus on those. And if they're all in dispute, then we'll know that too. So I'm actually just gonna, I think I'll just go around the table. I think I'll just, Emily, are you comfortable kicking that off for the first one?
Sure. I would like to remove 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7.
What page?
You're talking, looking at
26, 27.
your list of exemptions.
On which
26,
packet?
27.
Please pack.
Or 28 in the old package.
Thank you.
Just
28
behind where you are.
packet, 27. Thank you. I've got, it looks like my desk.
You
at
got
home.
too many papers. Okay. Okay, that's Emily. All right, Alan.
Well, the question I asked earlier was around 7. So we just triggered or kept 3C, which triggers the relocation assistance if they do the immediate family member, but 7 is an exemption. So to be consistent with our other vote, we would remove 7, right? Okay, and then 8, I don't think we should be doing relocation assistance for affordable housing.
And we do have a separate motion around 8, so yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that's right. That's D3, right?
Yep.
So that'll be
Okay.
Come to that.
Okay. All right, Randy.
And I just want to say too, when I make the motion, I'm going to actually start with D3 and then
Okay, good idea.
work back to,
Yeah.
well, that was,
Perfect.
we talked
Good
about that
idea.
earlier. But I'm for all 12 of the exemptions at this point.
Okay, Matt.
Okay, can you go around, Mayor?
Oh, okay, Jennifer.
Yeah, I would remove 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I'm 7, and I would remove 7.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you're removing.
Yes.
Okay. And 8's a different, okay.
8 separate, right?
And 8 separate. All right, Mike.
Go ahead. I'm the last.
Trying to keep all exemptions at the moment.
Okay. Okay, Lindsay.
I would remove 7 and I'd like to talk more about 5 and 6 and how that's structured in terms of, are these agreements made before the lease was signed, that the person is coming back? Is it fixed term or is it not fixed term? I think we talked about that last session a little bit. And then basically include the rest. I'd like to just comment that the 2, 3, 4, I would want to keep in to promote middle housing and small landlord exemptions in lieu of the small landlord compensation fund.
Okay, great. Mike?
I'm sorry, Mayor, I thought I said I'm in.
You said.
Did he, I'm sorry,
All
you
at this
did. You
time.
said keep
Thank
them
you.
all, and I lost you in my list. Okay, oh, Greg, I knew there was someone I hadn't gotten online. Greg, then I'll get you.
I just would remove 7 right now.
Okay. Okay. Okay, and Matt?
Yeah, I'm gonna go backwards. Sorry to confuse. And to start with 7, I agree. That's a good one to remove. Emily, remind me of the ones that you indicated, 2 through 6 as well.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
I'd put myself in that camp as well, Mayor, especially the occupying the same dwelling. I've seen firsthand that when a landlord does that, having some flexibility in their own home, or if they're sharing the common space, that seems to make some sense to me. So
wouldn't.
I would remove, because it would, by removing an exemption, when a landlord, this triggers the exemption right now is for when a landlord would trigger relo assistance,
Right.
right? And so removing
No,
that
no,
exemption.
the exemption is when they would not.
Exemption.
They're
means
exemption
they
from the
did
reload.
1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5. If they did that, they'd be exempt from relocation assistance.
Oh, okay. Then I can be convinced otherwise of 2, 3, 4. I think that's a good debate. But let's remove 5, 6, and 7 at the least.
Okay, Jennifer. did
I
you-
made a mistake. I didn't mean one.
You didn't mean
I'm
one.
okay with one.
You're okay with one. Okay, I was gonna ask you that.
Yeah.
Okay, and,
I was
Right.
getting very excited.
okay, all right. So I think that's the whole list. Does that help you in any way?
No,
Okay. Um,
I'm just gonna go ahead and start with D3, as I said, and I'm just going to take staff's recommendation for the base motion, and we can go from there.
Okay,
Move to direct the city manager to amend the draft ordinance to exempt affordable housing from all relocation assistance requirements.
Second.
That would essentially remove 8.
right. Any needed conversation or clarification on this one?
Yes.
Just to
Yes.
clarify, it wouldn't remove 8, it would expand 8. So right now, affordable housing is exempt from some of the relocation assistance triggers. This would exempt affordable housing from all of the relocation assistance triggers.
Right, but it wouldn't be an exemption.
It-
Oh, yeah.
It
would be an
It would be an
It would be an
It would be a more
exemption
comprehensive
plus.
Right,
exemption,
more
yeah.
comprehensive.
Exemption on steroids.
Right, right.
So
Okay, everyone clear?
no, I'm not clear.
Okay.
If we want to keep this as drafted, I'm looking now to Will and your team. If we want to keep this as drafted, explain to me what that means. And that would be a no vote to this motion, correct?
If you keep it as drafted, all of the exemptions 1 through 12 would stay in the draft ordinance.
No.
But
No.
would
Oh,
eight,
I'm
but
sorry.
8 would be,
D3. If you keep as drafted, it would be a limited exemption for affordable housing.
so we're revising it.
So right now, an affordable housing provider, under the way the ordinance is currently drafted, has to pay relocation assistance if they refuse to renew a lease or substantially change a lease. Those triggers still apply to affordable housing providers. If this motion were to pass, those triggers would not apply. Affordable housing would be entirely exempt from paying relocation assistance.
Wow. So put me down as a hard no in that column.
Okay. Okay,
Did you say that again?
Sure. So right now, affordable housing is treated as a landlord. An affordable housing provider is a landlord. And if they do things that any other landlord would do that would trigger relocation assistance, we would then look to these exemptions to see whether those whether the particular triggers they're exempt from payment. I'm not doing this very well. Let me back up. Right now, an affordable housing provider has to pay relocation assistance if the affordable housing provider doesn't renew a lease or substantially changes a lease. They don't have to pay relocation assistance for the rent trigger or for a no cause eviction during the first year. So some of the triggers apply, some of the triggers do not apply. If this motion passes, none of the triggers would apply to affordable housing providers. They would never be required to pay relocation assistance.
but what I'm understanding from the packet, though, is that there
By the
are
city.
other federal and state laws that do protect tenants in affordable housing. So that protection is already embedded in those affordable housing.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I apologize too. My comments are specific to the local relocation assistance.
So those protections are part, if you have trouble finding these in the packet, but it says in the packet, state and federally funded affordable housing providers are already subject to rigorous rental regulation policies designed to protect tenants from extreme rent increases and to keep rents affordable for the residents, and are generally prohibited from no cause evictions.
Yeah, is that working?
Question, Mayor?
Yeah, hold on one second.
I saw
will.
time, I thought, I have 49 seconds. right?
Yeah, Matt still has the question time. So
The question
Is that working?
are the
We're talking about,
regulations?
if you're accessing affordable housing, you are on the edge. You are our most vulnerable community members, arguably. So are the federal and state protections enough? Or do we, as a municipality, this is what we're wrestling with, I would imagine, do we as a municipality have a responsibility to ensure protections or ensure more protection?
Housing Policy Board, when they considered it, they recommended that affordable housing be exempt from all of the triggers,
Okay.
all aspects.
Did they provide a reason why, other than this D3 exemption?
It would add administrative requirements with no clear impact on tenant protections and people living in affordable housing.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Doesn't do anything.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mike, question?
I'm inclined to support the motion on 8 as Randy has laid it out. But I wonder if there's any information at all from staff, any data, any research that was done. Because with affordable housing, I wonder if there's any research that was done about impacts. Affordable housing, as all of us know, operate on very thin margins and deal with things that are, budgets that are very thin, thus making things possible to operate or not. So if we're putting them in the position of being responsible for substantial relocation assistance, are we putting them in a position to disincentivize the building of affordable housing in our community?
I think that the only information that we have is that that the actual requirements would not make it would not be more onerous on rental housing providers or less onerous on rental housing providers, because they would be essentially duplicative of other requirements that are already in place on them.
Mm-hmm.
And so the feedback that we have heard that the primary impact of requiring affordable housing to be subject to the same renter protections would be that they would be having more administrative burden to make sure that they're following two sets of regulations that essentially provide the same protection to their tenants. So it's just an administrative one and not one of substance, I guess you could say.
Well, of the rental amount, if they had substantial cases of, for example, non-renewal, as mentioned with the student example, would they not have a greater financial burden that would make the operation of affordable housing more financially difficult?
I don't think we have any information on that.
Okay, Matt, did you have one more comment on this?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm interested in making an amendment, Mayor, but I want to see how the vote plays out. Maybe I'll just do another motion. Because right now, the question in front of us is exempt affordable housing from all aspects of relocation assistance.
Mm-hmm.
And what's drafted is like the answer is yes, or keep as drafted. What I'm hearing is keep as drafted also the yes? Like what's the difference between the yes and the keep as drafted?
Keep as drafted means that affordable housing would be exempt from some relocation assistance triggers, but not all. A vote yes on this motion would exempt affordable housing from all relocation assistance triggers locally or local ordinance triggers.
And the sum are 4 and 5.
I'm sorry.
The sum are 4 and 5 on the triggers.
Yeah, I think that's right. The triggers in front of me.
Yeah, I'm in the camp of keep as drafted. So I would be a no on the motion, and
Okay.
I'd
Okay.
to not complicate things, Mayor, I'm not going to make an amendment. I'm just going to encourage a no,
Okay.
and then I'll float a new motion.
Oh, this was the easy one. All right. Okay, so I think we're ready for a vote on this motion on the table. All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Counselor Evans?
I'm a yes.
Yes, 7. Okay, opposed? Wait, 1. Okay. All right, that passes.
Sorry, Mayor, who was the one? Was it Matt?
Matt,
Thank you.
okay, all right. So I just wanna sort of, I'm looking for head nods and I also I want a suggestion. So the verse is, it's 5 after 7. We still have a chunk of work to do. We can plow through and anyone who didn't get dinner could just eat it at the dais in 20 minutes, or we could roll this over. Can we do that? Maybe we can't do that. Or we could roll this over, but I am,
Wednesday?
we would have to, I think,
Mayor,
to get this done. Yes.
The same
Oh,
staff.
they have to leave, right? We
need to
can't
go
do that
down
then.
and prepare
That's right. So we will
for the
have to,
7:30.
we will have to stop at this point actually to give time for transition. That's right.
It's a long night. You could pick it up at the end of your meeting.
Yeah.
That makes it a long night.
You hate us, don't you?
What's that?
You hate us, don't you?
I'm there with you. So
Yes, so
Oh, we could roll it over to Wednesday though, right?
so we're scheduled to talk about revenue again on Wednesday. We probably don't need 90 minutes. You could take 90 minutes. You could do it in less. So
Do it in 60.
we could do what we can with revenue and we could roll into this. I think if you start with this, we won't get to.
We
that
won't get to
piece, and there
revenue.
is Some
Yeah.
time.
yeah.
Urgency to that.
And I will just suggest when we come back that as you think about this, it seems to me that there's, I mean, there are quite a few folks who want to remove 7. We've already kind of addressed 8, that there are sort of groupings. 2, 3, and 4 are kind of similar topics, and we might sort of talk about those collectively. And 5 and 6, I think, are similar also, and we might talk about those together. So we might sort of group the conversation when we come back and see if we can't dial it in that way. And so work for everybody. Okay, so I think hard work. Thank you.
Do you want staff to be here potentially on Wednesday if we have some time?
I think so. I think
Okay.
so. I
Your
think
next alternative date next coming is July 10th if you don't. use
and
the
I don't
time.
think we want to push it that far. I think we should,
Right.
while we're steeped in it now, we need to keep going because we'll forget. We'll lose our way. Okay, thank you. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you so much for all your work.